Welcome to Chocolate Box Homestead. I'm Michele. If you're looking to create your slice of country living with practicality and finesse, no matter where you live, you're in the right place. All of my videos will be presented in step-by-step tutorial fashion to help you gain mastery of the many aspects of home economy. Today, we're going to make apple butter with backyard apples. Now, if you have an apple tree in your backyard, you may have been overwhelmed or inundated at some point with more apples than you knew what to do with. Well, apple butter is a very welcome addition to the pantry, and you can use up quite a few apples on this recipe. So let's get started. First of all, these apples have been washed and they are ready to go. The tools that we're going to be using are a chef's knife and a paring knife today. You could use an apple cutting tool that's specially made for apples. However, most of them have a very large central coring blade, which isn't scaled correctly for backyard apples. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking an apple and I'm slicing off a cheek, basically. I call it a cheek. Slicing off the other cheek and then going around each side, and I'm left with a square piece in the middle. And then, because I've done some experimenting, it's not very much fun to peel apples, especially when they're as small as these are. So I did some experimenting and discovered you actually don't have to peel the apples. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. After cutting up the apple sections, you'll notice I'm giving them a quick chop to make them into smaller, even-sized pieces. And I've been pretty lucky so far. I'm not seeing insect damage, so that's unusual. The thing about backyard apples, in addition to size, is often you have insect damage. There's one. I really want to encourage people to use fruit and vegetables and foods in general that are less than perfect. There's an awful lot of waste that happens because we're not sure how to manage less than perfect food. So this one has a little tunnel through it, so somebody's been in there and nibbled a little bit. I'm just going to cut that off and drop it in this container here, which I've designated for my chickens. And they will appreciate it very much. They would probably like it even more if there was a little bug or critter in there, because they think those are delicious. Now, sometimes when you cut into an apple, you will see damage right through the core, but sometimes you'll cut into one and it will maybe have some mold in the core, or some black frass, which would be from the little worm or critter that lived in the middle, and it may get little particles on your apple pieces. It's not the end of the world. Just give them a quick rinse and keep going. Okay, I'm dropping all of the apple pieces that are good into my crock pot, and I'm actually going to reserve these pieces, the cores and any little bits that aren't passing inspection for the crock pot. I'm going to reserve for making a batch of apple scrap vinegar. That's a little different than apple cider vinegar, which would start with real apple cider. But you can make some very good quality apple scrap vinegar with the scraps left over from your apples. So I'm going to keep all those aside, and I will be dropping them into a container. Now I'm going to keep chopping apples. I can't tell you exactly how many apples you'll need. I know that this is a 6-quart slow cooker, and it takes about 6 pounds of apples to fill it. Use whatever size slow cooker you have, and your aim is going to be to fill it to the top with just enough space so that you can set the lid on and that it will sit comfortably in the pot. So I'm going to keep chopping, and I'll see you in a little while. Well, it took about 12 to 15 minutes to chop enough apples to fill my slow cooker. What we're left with outside the slow cooker are these. The center core that contains the seeds and these little scrap pieces here that are going to the chickens. And these pieces cut off of either end of the core, the stem and the blossom ends that went into this container to make vinegar. So really, if you look at this process here, we went from whole apple to making use of the whole fruit in some fashion. And I think that's pretty cool. I hope you do too. At this stage, our next step is to add some water to the slow cooker. We're adding about a cup, and the lid. Make sure that it's settled snugly into the pot, and then make sure that you have your slow cooker plugged in, of course, and turn the pot on high. It'll take somewhere between 2 to 4 hours to completely cook all the apples. You, of course, want them to be completely soft all the way through. The apples will cook down, they're nice and mushy, and it's time to puree them. The easiest way to do this is with an immersion blender. And starting on low, press it down into the puree, just moving it around and turning it off before you lift up. You want to be careful, the apples are very hot, and if you happen to lift up while it's running, you could spray yourself with hot applesauce, which is what it is at this point, and we don't want that. So I'm going to continue pureeing all around the pot until I've got it fairly smooth. This is where the skins are just going to melt into the apple butter. This is such a cool trick. All right, that is smooth enough. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth at this stage because it's going to continue cooking down into apple butter. So we're going to call that good. And we're going to evaluate it. It is definitely thicker than commercial applesauce. And that is because we included the peels. The peels have melted away. I can't see any sign of them in here. But they've definitely done their job as for thickening the apple butter. Peels are rich in pectin. Let's add our flavors. Of course, what would apple butter be without cinnamon? I love cinnamon, so I use a lot. For this size pot, I put about a tablespoon in, and 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of cloves. You can leave those out if you don't care for them. The other options that you could consider would be nutmeg, ginger, or pumpkin pie spice. Make it taste the way you like. And then the secret ingredient is apple cider vinegar. I know you weren't expecting that. We're going to add about 2 tablespoons. And if you happen to have your own homemade apple scrap vinegar, that works too. But the tartness of the vinegar really brightens the flavor of the apples. It's rather remarkable. I'm going to add a couple pinches of salt to balance it out. And then stir those in. And then we're going to taste it to decide how much sugar it needs. And this will vary depending on the type of apples that you're using. That's pretty tart. These are backyard apples that are probably 50 years old, and they're very tart. So I'm going to stir in about 1.5 cups of sugar. And this is one of those things that you will have to use your good judgment on how much sugar to add. Generally, I recommend somewhere between 1 to 3 cups, depending on the size of your slow cooker and the type of apples that you're using. Now we have a decision to make. We can go one of 2 routes. If you want your apple butter to be finished the same day that you started it, then you'll need to add a small amount of water, say maybe a cup, because it's already very, very thick. Stir that in. Put the lid on and let it cook for 2 to 4 hours on low. And if it would work better for your timetable to let it cook overnight, you have that option too. And the way to do that is to add more water. You're going to want these apples to be at least as thin as commercial applesauce. That's what we're looking for. Quite a bit of moisture. I'm going to add even some more. Oh, I wish you could smell this. It smells so good. The sugars in the fruit and the sugar that we've added have caramelized. It has turned a rich, dark brown, and just one test remains. Can it hold a spoon up? It can. This is a little trick I learned from my dear friend Marion, and when your apple butter is thick enough to hold a spoon upright, it's ready. We're going to give it a little taste with a clean spoon. I think that's just right. I'm happy with the flavor. If it didn't taste quite right to me, you can still make adjustments. If it tastes a little flat, a little dull, add a little bit more apple cider vinegar to correct that. If it's too tart, add some more sugar, stir it in really well. You can even add additional spices at this point and stir them in, and you're good. Well, I think it's time to put it to the real test, which in my opinion is a piece of homemade bread. This is some of my homemade sourdough kamut bread, and I think it'll be beautiful with this. That is really, really good. So all that remains now is to store your batch of apple butter. And you can keep it in the refrigerator for about 5 days. You can freeze it in freezer containers for up to a year, labeled. Or you can go to your recent edition of the Ball Blue Book and water bath can it according to their recommendations. And that way you'll have a nice gift on hand. I'm planning a cluster of apple videos. I hope you enjoyed this one and will look for the next one. If you enjoyed this video as much as I did, would you give me a thumbs up? And if you learned something new, would you let me know what it is in the comments? The videos that I'm planning to put up over the next few weeks include fruit leather or fruit roll-ups, dehydrated apples, and some fun cuts just to make them extra snackable, and then that apple scrap vinegar that I mentioned earlier. Well, thank you for joining me today at the Chocolate Box Homestead. It was a lot of fun for me, and I hope to see you in the next video.